Hello and welcome. Coming up tonight, why is Netanyahu blocking food aid and starving the Palestinians of Gaza? I'll ask the ex-Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. Why isn't our Prime Minister bolder in his reset with the EU? His chief negotiator, Nick Thomas-Symonds, will explain. The top retailer, Lord Rose, gives the government marks out of 10 for its growth plan. Here's a spoiler, it won't be 10. Anushka and Srini know what kind of trade deal would actually make us richer.
Should we be trying to be best mates with the EU, or should we give it the cold shoulder?
And throughout the show, we have the two poles of British parliamentary politics, Labour's Belle Riviera Addy and Reform's Richard Tice. Watcher. Now, I think most would agree with Keir Starmer that the UK's immigration system has been something of a dog's breakfast. Quite a few would agree with his plans to make it harder for people with low skills to come to the UK and to turn citizenship into more of an earned right than an entitlement. But far from everyone would agree with him that the damage from mass immigration has been, his words, incalculable, and that we risk becoming an island of strangers. When I heard the Prime Minister make those colourful, some would say inflammatory remarks at his press conference on Monday, it was obvious he wanted to woo the large numbers of voters who are thinking of voting for Nigel Farage and Reform. And I was reminded of David Cameron when he was Prime Minister, when he, in effect, endorsed the views of Nigel Farage and Nigel Farage's previous party, UKIP, by promising to hold a referendum on whether to stay in or quit the European Union. Cameron thought he'd be unifying and redeeming his Tory party. In practice, his prime ministerial legitimisation of Farage's contempt for the European Union transformed Nigel Farage from a fringe figure in British politics to someone leading debate on the most important issue of that age. He played a big role in Farage's rise and rise that may yet lead to the total destruction of the Conservative Party. Arguably, Keir Starmer is making the same mistake as Cameron. Far from showing potential Reform supporters that Labour is on their side, he's telling them that Farage has a point on what they see as today's most important issue, immigration. Starmer may, in fact, be converting Reform waverers into Reform voters. This probably won't lead to Labour being annihilated by Reform, but in alienating voters who lean to the left, Starmer could easily cost Labour the next election. Anushka.
Thank you. I was told that before the last election, Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, told colleagues that whatever the policy, we must never punch down on immigrants, never punch down on refugees or on people on benefits. Well, some Labour MPs feel that recent policies on welfare, but also immigration, don't match that. On immigration, they are worried about Starmer's language that Robert was talking about, him saying we risk becoming an island of strangers, and talking about the incalculable damage that open borders have done to our society. I've spoken to some very upset Labour backbenchers today who do feel that Labour are aping Reform UK and could lose support from the left. So why this shift from the Prime Minister? Well, Downing Street point to the overall figures, saying that people are unhappy about net migration spiking up here in pink to above 900,000 under the previous government, and it is still projected to be 340,000 as we head towards the end of the decade. So will this government give people what they want? The Immigration White Paper suggests numbers will fall by 100,000, so to around 240,000. This exclusive polling from Merlin Strategy suggests that is nowhere near enough for people. 23% of people here want net migration to be zero, another 23% less than zero. So almost half the entire population, even the previous promise of tens of thousands, was too much. And in fact, 85% in this poll think that anything over 100,000 is too much. However, there is a big nuance to these opinions. When people are asked specifically, where should we reduce numbers, we get a very different response. Asked, would you cut the number of doctors, nurses, care home workers, teachers, lorry drivers, bankers coming into the country, a clear majority in red across the board say no, we shouldn't reduce immigration there. Now, that is partly because if we just take one sector, care, there are massive shortages. 131,000 vacancies, making the immigration challenge a tricky circle to square.
So it is a bit of a conundrum, isn't it, Anushka, this whole immigration debate, as well as being very inflammatory. Bella, I just want to come to you first. You've seen from Anushka and that new polling that 85%, apparently, of British people want numbers coming into the UK to be fewer than 100,000. That is less than we had in the 10 years before we left the EU, and it is an absolute fraction of numbers coming in now. It's also considerably less than this government can reduce the number to on the basis of its current plans. So what should the government do to, in a sense, meet the demands of British voters?
Well, I think firstly, as Anushka did, she looked beyond what they were actually saying. And generally, when you get down to it, people's issue with immigration isn't always what you think it is. People seem to think...
What they say it is, I think, is what we're saying.
Well,
here.
no, I mean, people seem to think that people are stuck on numbers, but we keep telling people, and this is a crisis of leadership, I think, we keep telling people that migrants are the problem. And the reality is when you do break down, for example, let's look at the last election, the people that were going to vote Labour but didn't, when you ask them what their issues are, they pointed to the winter fuel allowance, they pointed to PIP, they pointed to the cost of living more generally. And when you speak to them about immigration, they always speak about immigration in terms of resources. They have now been made to believe that it's because of migrants, there's no housing, it's because of migrants, there are longer NHS waiting lists, all of these different things. The issue is a crisis of how we talk about immigrants. Politicians do it again and again, and then we tell people that, you know, this is all that seems to concern people.
So can I just check that I understand what you're saying? I think you're saying that the overall numbers don't matter. What you want to see is your government talking to the British people differently. Is that right?
Absolutely. We need to explain to people why this has happened. And yes, do you know what? Immigration has soared, but we keep conflating so-called illegal immigration. I don't like to call it that. And, you know, I could go into explaining why with legal migration, quite literally by design, that points-based immigration system was meant to attract more people in post-Brexit. And it did that. And that hasn't necessarily had a negative impact on our country in terms of...
Some would say it has driven down wages in a way that I would have thought somebody like you would not approve.
I do not approve of driving down wages, but that is a crisis of profiteering in the same way the different private contractors that are running our asylum and immigration system are profiteering. That is a crisis of profiteering. That is not necessarily a crisis of the migrants coming in and what they're actually doing and providing for our society. They were asked to come in to do these jobs.
I've got to bring Richard in. Richard, so there, though, is the paradox that Anushka pointed to. British people apparently want the numbers to come down dramatically, but then when you say, should we have fewer care workers? They say no, because they know, as Anushka pointed out, we haven't got enough care workers. Well, so how do you square these circles?
Actually, it's not a paradox, but firstly, I'm going to challenge Anushka's numbers, because the latest ONS numbers from just last week is that they're increasing the forecast every year until 2028, I think, to 525,000 approximately, a big uplift on the 340 number previously being used. And the Prime Minister... he wouldn't give.
Well, we've got some new numbers coming out in a few days, but so we don't actually have to. We don't have to argue about the headline numbers. But what I want to know is how do you reconcile that gap between people saying we want care workers, we want doctors, but we don't want.
It's very simple because actually the numbers do matter, and it's not a matter of language. The voters have just expressed a clear view. They want the numbers to come down to below 100,000. We say net zero, but about 450,000 people leave the UK every year, so we can welcome a similar number. And you say, well, these are the areas where we need it, and some of them were just identified there to make sure we haven't got shortages. But we're not short of people in this country. We've got 5-point-something million on out-of-work benefits. We need to train up, skill up our own people, motivate them back into work, make work pay, and then everybody's a winner.
I mean, I have to say, I just want to challenge you on how many... We actually don't know how many people are leaving every year because the stats on how many people are leaving are unbelievably terrible.
But that is the long-term average. But let's remember, what we do know, in the last 2 years of data, and there'll be an update next week, it's about 1.6 million people net. And that is leading to huge pressure on housing and public services. It's a basic economic principle of supply and demand. It's undeniable.
Look, there's tons more we've got to talk to both of you about, but I've just got to go to Anushka briefly before we come back, I'm told.
Yeah, because I want to talk about Israel. I want to show you a pretty significant intervention last night from the UN's humanitarian lead, Tom Fletcher. He accused Israel of deliberately and unashamedly imposing inhumane conditions on civilians with no food, medicine, water or tents entering Gaza in 10 weeks. And he talked about fears of famine. Now, let's look at how tough things are. The UN cited an IPC report that categorises how people are in terms of food insecurity. So this first looks at Gaza from April the 1st to the 10th of May. And the first thing to note is that there is no one who they consider totally fine, able to meet essential food and non-food needs. Only 7% were at the next level up, stressed with minimally adequate food consumption. 37% were said to be in crisis, with food consumption gaps reflected by acute malnutrition. 44% in emergency, large food consumption gaps, high levels of acute malnutrition and excess mortality, with 12% in full catastrophe or famine with an extreme lack of food, with starvation and death cited. So that is the past month. And then look at the projections. They say that by the end of September, they expect this to happen, that everyone will be in either crisis, emergency or catastrophe, 22% in the worst category. That is nearly 500,000 people facing catastrophic food insecurity. The Israeli government spokesperson, David Mencer, said today that the hunger is caused by Hamas and denied that they are starving Gaza.
Thank you, Anushka. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. Mr. Olmert, thank you so much for joining us tonight. When you heard the UN's Tom Fletcher talk yesterday evening about 2.1 million, all 2.1 million Palestinians in Gaza facing famine, what was your reaction?
The same as yours. I said in a couple of interviews yesterday and today that I'm not familiar with all the specific details and the percentages that were provided now. And I don't know exactly who can measure it precisely to the dot. But generally speaking, I think that this is totally unacceptable, totally unbearable, and totally unforgivable. This is something that needs to be taken care of. And it is incumbent upon the government of Israel to provide all the necessary humanitarian needs of the population in Gaza. And there can be no excuse. There is something that needs to be done immediately. I think that we have to end the war immediately anyway, and get back all the hostages and release Palestinian prisoners and have an agreement and pull out from Gaza. But we definitely have to provide the humanitarian needs of the population, and this is intolerable, unacceptable, and unforgivable.
So what would you say to the Israeli Defense Secretary, Defense Minister Israel Katz, who's actually been explicit in saying that withholding food is a weapon of war against Hamas? I mean, I have to say the UN would say, just his words say that Israel's government is currently complicit in a war crime.
Again, I can say only this. I speak so much and so often, almost 4 or 5 times a day in the different media across the world, that I don't trust, don't believe, don't accept the Israeli government statements, whether the Prime Minister or the Minister of Defense. So I don't want to get into the arguments about specifics. I say, in principle, what happens today in Gaza is totally unacceptable, intolerable, and unforgivable. And this is the responsibility of the Israeli government and no one else. It's incumbent upon us. We have to make sure that all the humanitarian needs of the population are taken care of in the most effective manner immediately. Full stop.
I mean, the Israeli government says, and this is one of its other reasons for not letting the aid in, is that it doesn't trust the United Nations to distribute it. I have to say, with the exception possibly of Donald Trump, and I'm not quite clear what Donald Trump's position is on this at the moment because he seems to move around a bit, but there's no other government in the world that doesn't trust the UN to distribute the aid.
So let's put it this way. The United States president, I just heard him say today that the people of Gaza needs to be supported and helped and that food must be provided to them. So there was an idea, and I think it's been raised in Israel, that there will be an American company providing and making all the necessary arrangements with the assistance of the Egyptians and other. I don't care who will do it. I know that this is the responsibility of the Israeli government to make sure that it will be provided. If they don't trust the United Nations, they can trust an American company, a civil company that will do it, whoever. That needs to be taken care of. No excuse can be accepted.
You want peace. Is there any prospect of peace while Netanyahu remains Prime Minister?
Well, we all hope. We are making every possible effort. You know, one has to be appreciative of this. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis are rioting and demonstrating almost on a daily basis cross country. Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, in townships cross country against the government of Netanyahu. The polls show that more than 60% of the population do not trust the prime minister, do not believe that the considerations made by the government of Israel and the prime minister based on the real, genuine national security interest of the state of Israel, that mostly it is done because of personal political interest of political survivability, whatever. So I think we are quite close to the collapse of Netanyahu. And I hope that there will be elections soon. I don't know how soon. Don't try to ask me because I don't know. But I believe that the concerted effort and also the developments over the last few days, particularly, I think the appearance at this stage, that President Trump is not particularly enthusiastic about Netanyahu. The fact that he ignored Israel in this trip to the Middle East is unprecedented in American modern history. No president would have ever done it. The fact that they negotiated directly with Hamas behind the back of the Israeli government, which was perhaps unavoidable because the Israeli government doesn't want to return back the hostages, because it doesn't want to stop the war. It wants to continue the military confrontations with Hamas and to occupy Gaza for an indefinite period of time. So the Americans are starting to shift a little bit. And I hope that at some point, sooner than later, President Trump, as we all know him, he can do things which were not done perhaps before by any American president. He will summon Netanyahu and say to him, enough is enough.
But do you think he will do that? And because Netanyahu is threatening invasion in a matter of days, will Trump prevent that?
I think Trump can prevent it. No one else can do it. Now, had someone told you a couple of weeks ago that Trump will summon the new ISIS leader of Syria into Saudi Arabia and be so impressed with him, how good looking he is and what a brave soldier he is. He was a soldier in ISIS, by the way, yeah, and say that he removes all the sanctions against Syria and that he's looking forward having Syria as part of the Abraham Accords, you would be quite surprised, right? He did it, so Trump can do things that perhaps no one else did. I hope, I don't know. Yeah, as everyone says, he's a little bit unpredictable. But I think that if he will do it, and he can do it, that can make a difference. If he will summon Netanyahu and tell Netanyahu, enough is enough. You have been manipulating so many of us for such a long time, no more. I think that if it will not force Netanyahu, it will bring the collapse of the government.
Ehud Olmert, it's been a great pleasure talking to you tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you'll join us again soon. Thank you again.
Thank you. Take care.
So if I could turn to you, Bel, first. I mean, you've heard there a former Israeli Prime Minister talking about what he says are the terrible things that the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, is forcing on the people of Gaza. Do you think our government is putting enough pressure on Israel to lift the food blockade?
I don't think we are. I mean, all of us right across the world are not doing everything that we can do. We are quite literally watching a genocide happen before our eyes, and we have to be frank about what it is we are seeing now. Doing this to an entire population, that's exactly what it is genocide. I mean, we continue to sell parts to them. We refuse at the moment, and whilst we support a two-state solution, we currently don't recognise Palestine as a state. You know, two-state solution, 1 + 0 doesn't equal 2. We need to, give them equal weighting at this stage, and we need to be clear about what's happening. There are war crimes being committed, and any sort of support for that makes no sense.
Richard, Ehud Olmert is hopeful that President Trump will put pressure on Netanyahu to lift the blockade and indeed not to invade. Do you think he's right to have that optimism?
But he also said that, is everybody doing the maximum they can? As Belle has just said, look, we all want the killing to stop. We want the war stopped. But the quickest way to do that is to put pressure not on Israel, but on Hamas to give the hostages back. And too many people around the world are not focusing on that first. And I have to say, I think Tom Fletcher's comments to the UN has refused the US's humanitarian aid plan that is endorsed by Israel and is the best chance to get food and humanitarian aid into Gaza immediately, and extraordinarily, the UN has rejected that. And I think that's shameful because they are defending UNRWA, which is riddled with Hamas sympathisers, and people don't want to hear it, but that is the truth. There are plenty of other agencies.
Hang on a second. It's not just the UN that's rejecting this mechanism. I mean, I watched the Security Council last night. Every member of the Security Council was on the side of the UN in all of this.
Defending the UN.
So to be clear, that the notion that this alternative plan will necessarily provide the food that we need.
You cannot say, are we doing everything we possibly can, and then out of hand reject the US plan that is endorsed by Israel that everybody is criticising.
We are absolutely not doing everything we can.
Why not give it a go?
The US continue to arm Israel. We are doing it in some respect as well. And then we've got some, half-cocked plans as to how aid are going to get. If we continue, if the onslaught continues.
But also, just to be absolutely clear, Richard, I don't think any of us can have confidence that Israel genuinely wants to get the aid in.
Robert.
Robert,
that is shameful. Come on.
The Prime Minister of Israel has said he wants to invade in a few days' time. Give me a break.
Israel, Robert, have endorsed the US plan. Why wouldn't you try it? Why wouldn't you give it a go? Just reject it.
OK, and why is Trump not talking to Netanyahu? So, at this point, I think we need to just go for a very quick break, and we'll pick all up again in just a minute or two.
Are we going to talk about something?
Oh, I don't know if these two can listen to me. So, Donald Trump visited Qatar today as part of his tour of the Gulf, and he's doubled down on his plans to accept a luxury jumbo jet worth an estimated $400 million from Qatar. So we've been thinking about political gift-giving, and I've got a little quiz for you. You ready for this? A little quiz? OK, it's... So, which of these things did the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk gift to President Barack Obama? 2 kilograms of Polish smoked beef, the video game The Witcher 2, Assassins of Kings, or a stool owned by the composer Chopin?
It's got to be the stool.
I've gone for the beef.
You're going beef? What did you go for?
It's got to be the stool. I mean, anything else is just...
Come on. What do all boys want to do? It was the computer game.
No.
Really?
Why is that,
played that?
was it made in Poland?
I actually don't know. Can anyone check? Was it made in Poland? I'll come back to you on that in a minute. OK, during his first term in office, which of the following did Trump receive from Saudi Arabia? Full-length robes made out of cheetah fur, a platinum putter and golf ball studded with white and pink diamonds, although we don't have them on the picture, or a vintage gold pocket watch featuring the face of King Faisal?
Golf.
Definitely the golf.
Yeah.
We agree.
Yeah, we
They
agree
were
there.
the putter. Must.
You both think
Quite
that Trump,
possibly
you
the
both
only
think
thing
that?
we will ever agree on ever. But
I'm telling you what, it was the cheetah.
No.
It was the full-length robes made out of cheetah fur.
Oh, my God.
And here's a bit of a good thing. Trump failed to hand these over until his last day in office, and on inspection, it turned out they were fake. Yeah. OK, which of these did George W. Bush receive? A rollerblading kit from the Netherlands, 300 pounds of raw lamb from Argentina, a book called The Worst Case Survival Handbook from Brunei.
I think you probably needed the last one.
The beef.
Huh?
The lamb.
You're in the.
Sorry, it's the.
It was lamb.
I'm so sorry. The lamb.
You think lamb?
Yeah.
The answer is all three. And I've just been told that the developer of the Witcher game
Is Polish?
is Polish.
Okay.
There's always got to be a link, no?
Always a link.
Oh, extra questions if I need them. Sorry, I read this out here. What would you give Donald Trump as a diplomatic present?
I'd give him a new set of golf clubs.
Would you?
Yeah.
You good at golf?
But I used to be.
What's your
Ish.
handicap?
It was a sort of slightly bandit 13.
Oh,
I've,
okay.
I've retired.
It's not anymore. Belle, what about you? In 5 seconds? Nothing.
Nothing.
He's got
You're not
nothing.
going to give him a
Nothing.
present.
It's nothing.
Thank you. Bye.
Welcome back. Now, I know the one thing you've all been missing desperately is debate about our relationship with the European Union. So we've got a treat. A little earlier, I spoke with Nick Thomas-Symonds. He's the Cabinet Office Minister who's been leading the government's negotiations for an improved set of trade, defence and security arrangements with the European Union. And whatever he's achieved will, in theory, be announced on Monday at a special summit. Now, Brussels wants to make it easier for young people to move back and forth for work and study between the UK and EU in what's called a youth mobility scheme. But given the Prime Minister, we've just been talking about it, the Prime Minister's attempt to cut immigration, I asked Nick Thomas-Symonds why he was planning to agree such a deal.
Youth mobility schemes can bring great benefits in terms of travel, in terms of work, in terms of culture. It has to be smart and controlled. But we currently have around 13 youth mobility schemes already
With other
that
countries.
are in operation with other countries. Now, first and foremost, we will have a policy of secure borders. That's exactly what we are implementing. We also pledged that we would not return to freedom of movement, and we will not. But where there is a youth mobility scheme that, as I say, is smart and is controlled and is in our national interest, then of course we will look at that.
Can we expect to see a scheme on Monday?
I think what we are going to see on Monday will be around some principles, but I'm not...
So we won't see a fully fleshed out scheme on
as,
Monday?
As you would expect me to say, though, Robert, when negotiations are ongoing, obviously you're not going to give a running commentary on every detail, but the principle that we are sticking to here is the national interest.
Sure.
And this will be a deal across a number of different areas. We will only sign that deal if overall it's in our national interest to do so.
I think you're saying we will at least see the outline of a mobility scheme on Monday. You can shake your head if I'm wrong about
Well,
that.
well, no, nothing, Robert, in these talks is agreed until everything is agreed. We will only sign something in the national interest.
I've got that. Now, Anusha's got some data to share with us.
Yeah, I just want to talk more about that relationship with the EU. The Resolution Foundation had a report that has helped us to place policies along this spectrum from giving them the cold shoulder to being best mates. So this is actually where Labour's election promises last year goes. Deals to tackle the cost of food, help touring artists, recognise qualifications, for example, in accountancy. The Res Foundation estimated that they would boost trade by just under £4 billion, which they said was actually tiny in terms of lost trade. So quite cool on our scale. They are pushing now for more ambitious regulatory alignment. Also, we think a bit more access to the single market. EU countries are said to be pretty sceptical, but if it happens, Greg Thwaites and Emily Fry think it would mean 0.6% on GDP. A move up our scale, but they say still quite small. This over here is Theresa May's original Brexit deal, the idea of all the UK being in a customs zone, like we eventually negotiated for just Northern Ireland. They say that could deliver 2% on GDP. Or Labour could go full Lib Dem. Customs union now, single market later. The Res Foundation didn't model this as they do not think it will happen. But UK, in a changing Europe, think GDP was hit by 2 to 4% by losing the customs union and more from the single market. Now, that would, you might say, prevent us doing those trade deals with countries like India and the US. And look, it is true that we trade a fair amount with both countries across goods and services. But look at this. Our trade with the EU totally dwarfs both of them. So should that be our priority?
Thanks, Anushka. So, straightforwardly, in terms of what we're going to get, is it simply going to be what you promised in your manifesto?
Where there are proposals that are within our red lines, of course, we would, as any responsible government would, look at those. But the red lines that we were elected on, that we will not rejoin the single market, we will not rejoin the customs union, and we will not go back to freedom of movement, will be respected. That's the framework in which we've gone into the negotiation. But that isn't to say that we are not ambitious. Take, for example...
But can I just ask you, membership of the customs union doesn't involve having to have free movement from the EU. Actually, if you look at essentially what other countries have achieved, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be bossed around by the European Court of Justice. As Anushka points out, it does mean that we'll be slightly constrained on trade deals with other countries. But it would add a couple of percent to our GDP compared to less than 0.5% from what you are proposing. At a time when people in Britain feel poor, why not be more ambitious?
Well, we are very ambitious within our red lines, but just to take that point about the customs union, I mean, that is an argument of the past. We are looking to the future. We are now in a very different situation because we do have concluded trade deals with other countries. We've seen, even in recent weeks, this government has delivered the UK-India trade deal. I was in Scotland only on Monday, listening to the Scotch Whisky Association about the huge benefits that the reduction of tariffs to export whisky into India are going to bring. We've seen the economic deal with the United States, which is going to save jobs. Just you take Jaguar Land Rover, but many other jobs as well. These are hugely important things that we can do with the independent trade policy. And we have always said...
But if you just look at that chart, you know, our trade with India, 43 billion. Our trade with the United States, 315 billion. Our trade with the European Union, 813 billion. And I mean, I looked at the India trade deal, which by standards of trade deals with India was pretty good, right? Because it's a very closed economy. But we were going to have to wait 15 years for a 4 billion increase in our GDP, which is a rounding error. Whereas we could get so much more out of, for our prosperity, if we were just prepared to be a bit bolder in bringing down barriers with the EU.
But, Robert, we are seeking to bring down barriers with the EU. And I look at that chart over there. The government's policy is you don't have to choose between those different allies of our country that sit there on that chart. Our policy is to increase trade across all three of those areas and indeed to open up other markets around the world as well. And with regard to...
You're sounding like Liz Truss. With all due respect,
I genuinely don't accept that comparison, Robert. But just to say in respect of the European Union, what we are seeking to do on goods, whether it is in terms of agricultural products, food and drink, is to bring down trade barriers to increase that goods trade. That is precisely what the government is seeking to do, and that is what is in our national interest.
Now, we're almost out of time, annoyingly, but I've got to talk to you in respect of your sideline, rather distinguished sideline as a historian of the Labour Party. I just want to know, is it in Labour's DNA to say that migration is making us strangers in our own land?
Well, that is not the phrase that the Prime Minister used. The Prime Minister was warning about the future. He was saying that we want to be a country that marches forward together as neighbours, and that means
But
that
he
we
warned
have to...
he warned that the way we were going would lead... I mean, it was... Look, I completely get that he didn't realise there was a resonance with Enoch Powell, but you will understand why many of your colleagues, right, not opponents, your colleagues have said to me how anxious and upset they were by this language. And you've got... I mean, as a historian of the Labour Party, you've got to understand why they're upset.
But, Robert, there is no comparison with Enoch Powell. The Prime Minister said about diversity and the huge benefits it's brought to our country. Enoch Powell's speech was making the opposite case, so there is no comparison.
No, but he is warning that thus far and no further, and that sounded Powell-like to people.
No, I mean, Harold, you asked me about history. I mean, Harold Wilson was in power 10 months and made restrictions on visas. What it is about is listening to the concerns of the British public and responding to them. And that's precisely what the Prime Minister was doing. And it's precisely what our immigration white paper is doing, bringing down that level of net migration over the course of the Parliament, listening to voters' concerns and responding.
Nick Thomas-Symonds, as always, thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure.
I mean, Belle, you heard the Prime Minister saying we risk becoming an island of strangers. That was the precise phrase he used. Did that upset you?
I found it extremely disappointing. And, you know, there may be talk of perhaps not meaning it like that or not meaning to echo Enoch Powell, but we have to understand as politicians that language matters, and it's not, you know, just what we say, it's how we say it, and that's how it was taken. It was taken to mean almost exactly the same thing. And who are these strangers? Were we talking about migrants? They're our neighbours, they're our friends, people that have come to live in this country, make their lives here, pay taxes here. You know, these are our people. To other them in that way is the type of thing that sows division, and is ultimately the type of thing that led to those riots that we saw last year. We don't want any more of that.
I mean, did you applaud the Prime Minister when he said that?
Well, what I applaud is that he's listening and learning to why we're doing well, because we're saying we can't go on with mass uncontrolled low-skilled immigration. Smart immigration, where people come to the country to integrate, to work, to speak the language, that can be a great thing. But if people don't integrate and they don't speak the language, then you end up with people living in communities and not knowing each other. And that, I think, we all want people to work together in communities. And so...
But you make out like that's not the case.
And it's not the case.
No,
I'm sorry, Belle, in many communities it's not the case.
I have to disagree with you.
Well, then I'm afraid you go to many towns up and down the country, including in my constituency. If you walk through the middle of Boston, you will hear 50% of the people walking through the town centre do not speak English as their first language. 30% of them speak not a word of English. So I'm afraid it is the case.
I'm sorry. I think you'll find that the majority of people that do come and settle here do actually speak English. I think this idea that people don't integrate is false, and actually sentiments like that end up stoking further divisions.
But just go round the towns and look and listen and learn. With the greatest respect, I'm just telling you, in my constituency, and people want it to work.
And I'm sorry, in the United Kingdom, English is not the only language spoken. We also speak Welsh in some parts. Is that a problem?
Not a problem, but the majority of people who speak Welsh, I'm quite sure they also speak English.
And the majority of people that speak other languages also speak English. This idea
I'm afraid there are many places where that isn't the case. Look, I think what we want is we want immigration to work, but it has to work for both sides of the deal.
And immigration has been working. It's been working.
It hasn't. It's made it poorer.
It has not made us poor. Immigrants have not made us poorer.
The good thing about your conversation is it's a very respectful conversation, but I have got to go to our next interview, so you'll forgive me. A little earlier, I had a chat with one of Britain's most prominent business leaders. He's the ex-boss of Marks & Spencer, Asda and Ocado, Lord Rose. He also chaired the 2016 referendum campaign to keep us in the EU. So I wondered if the government's seemingly, I think we've just seen that, timid approach to rebuilding relations with the EU was something of a disappointment to him.
I'm afraid you're probably right, and that's what I'm fearful of. And yet, the opportunity for us to have a really substantial summit where we get something out of it is really important. And, you know, here we are, 10 years on now from Brexit, 10 years on now where nobody can deny that one of the issues about immigration is caused by Brexit. The issues are in terms of our very poor economic performance is down to Brexit. We've done a few deals, but none of those add up to what we have lost from Europe.
And so you would just say to the Prime Minister, get a backbone, be a bit more courageous in terms of improving the terms of trade with the EU.
Yes, listen, it's not easy, but the short answer is, you know, I keep up with the press as everybody else does. You know, the French have told us quite clearly, forget about modified crops. They want some fish. We want them to help us with immigration. Well, I suspect if we gave them a bit of fish, they'd help us with immigration. And would the general public actually see that as being a trade-off that they were prepared to back? And what worries me is that if you look, and I think there were some recent polls suggesting that even if you are a reform supporter, you are very pro actually doing a deal with the EU, which is quite interesting.
And you talked about immigration, but the other absolutely striking thing is it's a much bigger market for us,
yes,
even than America.
Yes.
The costs of trading there have gone up very significantly.
Yes.
Presumably what you'd really like to see is a more ambitious trade deal.
I'd like to see a unique trade deal, which I think we are perfectly capable of dealing with, that is a tailored one between the EU and the UK. They need us, we need them. And if you sit down and talk rationally to them, I'm sure that we can come up with a deal. Sure, there'll be a bit of nickeling and diming, but we know we've sit on each other's doorsteps now for 2,000 years. We understand each other.
Now, when you were last on the programme, you were pretty negative about the Conservative government, pretty positive about Rachel Reeves becoming Chancellor. Has she let you down, or are you still positive?
Well, listen, you know that I am a Conservative, but I'm not a Conservative very actively. I just believe in Conservative values. I was deeply disappointed by the last 4 or 5 years of the Conservative government, and I did wish genuinely well the Labour government. But we are in now nearly 1 year, and I'm actually quite horrified by what I haven't seen. You know, we have got, in my view, the worst economic situation in the UK since probably, and you and I are old enough just about to remember, me more than you, Harold Wilson. Right? We have got no growth. We have got record debt. We have got no productivity. We have got no investment that we need badly, and we have got no confidence in the UK. We have to do something about it. And I don't see yet any clear pathway to a route out at the moment, and that does worry me.
Unemployment is rising, not dramatically, but a bit. Does that surprise you?
Well, no, listen, it's not surprising because until very recently I was the chairman of quite a large retail business. We were slapped in November by £100 million plus just for one business of extra costs. Well,
this was Asda.
Yes, and if you do that to a business a month before the new financial year starts, you don't have very many options. You either cut costs, the biggest single cost in any business after, you know, with rates and rents is people. And the only other alternative you've got is to put prices up. Now, we are sitting in that very difficult situation. We want growth, and that's what the Chancellor keeps talking about. But you're not going to get growth unless you get confidence, and you're not going to get growth unless you get the economy moving again. It's a very, very tough one. I'm not unsympathetic, but I am not very happy about the lack of progress that they've made so far. It's been a lot of talk and not a lot of action.
So don't go away. Much more from my interview with Lord Rose. Might talk about cyber hacking and Marks & Spencer. You never know. So come back in a minute or two.
Hello, welcome to The Break, #Preston. I didn't even know it was Eurovision this weekend, did you?
Yeah.
No.
You didn't either. Not got our parties ready. It's the final. So what better than a few minutes of Eurovision love? I'm not going to ask you about music, but I am going to ask you to score one country 12 points. We get it right. On, let's go. Best food. Which European country has the best food?
Italia.
Oh,
Italia?
that's actually going to... Oh, my gosh, that's two things.
Twice we've agreed. Things are looking good.
The beautiful agreement.
Little bond.
OK, so you
between
both like
you.
a bit of Italian. Which country's got the best politicians?
Oh,
The United Kingdom.
Well, you're saying you are the
I'm
best politician.
sorry, I wouldn't even...
As a collective.
As a collective.
As a collective.
Come
All
on.
right, you know in Eurovision you have to give other
No,
points.
but you're in it.
No, I'm a biased judge, definitely.
No country?
Can't vote for yourself.
No, you can't vote for yourself.
You've got to
Oh,
choose
who's
another
the...
country.
Iceland. There we go.
Iceland?
Yeah.
Oh,
know about
OK.
Iceland? Do you know anything about Iceland? You're going to have to brief me later. You're going to have to brief me about Iceland.
I'm
mate.
going to go back to Italy then. I think Maloney's doing a great job.
OK, you
would.
disagree on that. There's a divide here. All right, best scenery.
No.
Oh.
So much.
Switzerland, the Alps, is very special.
Oh, you could go because Switzerland
We could
is
go back to
where
Italy again.
Eurovision is.
Because we love Italy.
I'm going to go with France.
France?
Yeah.
France.
Yeah.
Oh, OK. Best political leader. And just hold yourself back, Richard. You can't go UK again.
Sorry, like in history.
In history. Oh, you could go in history. This is our show. We can do whatever we want.
Oh, I don't know.
Best European political leader in history.
In history.
I'm going to be
I
impressed
just
by your
didn't want to
history
pick
here.
one now
Church,
because...
in history, it's
No,
probably
I
church.
said not
What are we
your
doing
own
after the break?
country.
Yeah, you
Make
keep
up my
going.
mind.
You support
Very
others.
restrictive.
How are you going to cope on Saturday night?
I'm not going to watch it.
No.
Nothing on. Oh,
No, I
politicians can't be political leaders.
don't want to
Okay,
get myself
how
into
about
trouble.
best quality of life?
Best what, sorry?
Best quality of life.
Oh, Norway, Sweden. They're
I was going to say Norway for best scenery. I think that's lovely.
Norway's beautiful.
Not
but
best quality of life up north. I went up
Very
north.
expensive.
It's dark all the time.
Portugal,
oh, do they get sad a lot?
Portugal.
great quality of life, great weather,
Would you move there? Holiday home?
delicious wine, good
Delicious.
port. Not that I'm
You
a
have
port
spent
drinker.
quite a lot.
You know that's a bit harder now.
Finally,
with the whole
will you be
Brexit
watching
thing.
it?
No.
Will you be watching it?
No,
Definitely not.
definitely not.
No, probably not. I'm quite busy.
Bye.
Welcome back. Now, in the second part of my chat with the business leader, Lord Rose, I asked him how damaged his former business, M&S, and indeed the Co-op, will have been by the recent cyber attacks on them.
Well, you have to constantly be on your guard, and a simple, maybe not very good analogy is that it's a bit like being in the road with 5 houses or 3 houses. One's got no burglar alarm, one's got a modest burglar alarm, and the other one's got the super burglar alarm. If you've got the super burglar alarm, you're less likely to get burgled. So you have to keep investing in systems, upgrading systems, and be wary. But these attacks are going on daily. I have been subject to them myself in the last 10 years, and you have to be constantly on your guard. I feel for M&S, it's a tough situation.
And do you think customers, to an extent, will forgive M&S? Because obviously their service has been massively disrupted.
Well, I think everybody understands. I think slightly, I was a little bit surprised only to receive an email yesterday telling me that my personal data may have been compromised when this has been going on for some time. Actually, I'd already worked out that was quite likely to have happened. But it's a very tough situation. I suspect, and this is what I am told, and I have no inside information, that these guys got in through a quite important front door, locked it behind them, and they've been wandering around these places looking to see what damage they can cause. That's very hard to root out.
Now, we're almost out of time. I've got 3 relatively, I think, straightforward questions to ask you. We talked a little bit earlier about a possible deal with France on immigration, a possible one. The Prime Minister said something that I was surprised by on Monday. He said that immigration had done incalculable damage to the UK. He also said that immigration had turned us into a nation of strangers. Was that something you recognise? Is that the kind of language you would expect?
Well, listen, I've just come here in a taxi.
Yeah.
I'm a great believer in talking to taxi drivers. I use black cabs. And at the end of the day, if you go back 10, 15, 20 years when I was running M&S, they used to tell you straight away what was right and what was wrong.
Yeah.
I haven't been in a black cab recently where I haven't heard either the Conservatives or the Labour Party being lambasted.
Right.
Right? And the biggest elephant in the room that nobody's wanted to talk about is, hallelujah, whether it's woken up to it, is immigration. Yeah. But if you look at the facts, and I'm not just pumping now the whole issue of EU and Brexit, but immigration was running at about 200,000 per year up to the time that we came out of the EU.
That's right.
It's now running at 750,000 a year with a possible promise that we might get it down to 650. That is unsustainable. And it will change the nature of the UK. It has changed the nature of the UK. Not all for the bad, but we have to recognise that it is unsustainable at the moment because we can't afford to get our economy straight and, and look after everybody who wants to be looked after and take all these people in. So what do we do?
Right, I'm told annoyingly we're out of time, but I've got one more question I've got to ask you. You said that if, as a Tory, Nigel Farage ever became leader of the Tory party, you'd leave the country. He might become Prime Minister. What will he do if he becomes Prime Minister?
I will definitely leave the country. He won't become Prime Minister, we hope. But that is, if you were sitting there looking at the danger signs, which is what the Prime Minister has done this week, you'd be taking action. I'm fascinated to see what the parties are going to come up with.
Stuart, as always, a joy to see you. Thanks for coming.
Robert, nice to see you.
Right, now, we've got just a couple of minutes left. Anushka, you're going to show us a couple of headlines?
Yes, here you go. The Financial Times, interestingly reporting in tomorrow's paper that post-Brexit reset talks with Brussels have stalled over fishing and youth mobility. The article, when you read it, says the EU wants more concessions from the UK. And also, there are peace talks in Istanbul tomorrow on Ukraine, Russia. There was some talk that maybe Vladimir Putin would be there himself. At the moment, it looks like he is not listed in the Kremlin delegation, though Moscow is sending a delegation.
So, Richard, I suppose the thing I had been burning to ask you is your leader, Nigel Farage, has constantly said the last lot didn't do Brexit properly and he would do it better. So that presumably implies you do think there is a better deal to be done with Brussels, do you?
Well, we think that actually, in a sense, we gave away too much money, we gave away far too much fishing. I very much hope that the Prime Minister holds firm and doesn't sell fishing out. I've got fishermen in my constituency, and we don't want freedom of movement opened up through the back door of youth mobility. Almost all of the freedom of movement we had was through youth mobility under the age of 30.
I mean, you'd probably, and your colleagues would probably think that the Prime Minister should be bolder on this youth mobility scheme, don't you?
Absolutely. I mean, what is wrong with it? What have you got against people being able to move freely in that way and, experience work in different places? It makes perfect sense. And we just need to stop pretending like Brexit was in any way good. I mean, we're losing, an estimated £100 billion a year on the current deal we have. And whatever you think you could have done better, all of the figures show that Brexit has been bad for our economy, and we need to do whatever we can to get as close to the EU as possible because we've lost so much already and we cannot afford to lose any more.
A economic model where its biggest country, Germany, is in deep recession.
And,
why would you want to get closer to that?
Well, guess what? Sadly, we're probably not going to resolve this tonight, but we're going to have both of you back because the debate goes on. Now, that's it. President Trump has got his freebie flying palace from the Qatar royal family. I'll be taking the night bus home, and I'm totally grateful for that. Goodbye for now.